Yes, we are recording this webinar. I've had a couple of people um, contact me and ask me, said that they registered, but they weren't going to be able to make it. And is this going to be available as a recording? Yes, it is. And Rich just started that. And he should have it available and on our website by next Wednesday. So if you want to come back and look at it again, share it with someone else, feel free to do that. Um, okay, so at the end of the presentation, what I'd like you to do, if you have questions along the way of a substantive nature about the grants program, just jot them down for yourself. And then at the end of my presentation, we'll have a Q&A session where you'll be able to be unmuted. We'll ask you to identify yourself, ask your question, and then we'll answer it and move on to the next person. And we'll go over that again once we finish the actual presentation. If you have any technical difficulties in terms of the technology of the webinar and are having problems, you can either think there's a place here where you can raise your hand, or you can send a note on the chat box to Rich, and he will try to take care of that. For example, if a slide isn't showing, or if I lose my microphone or something, that'd be the kind of question that we'd want you to ask as we're going along. And the presentation is actually almost completely based on information that is on the website already. The intent here is to just kind of stress some of those things, but more importantly, to ask and address your questions. Okay? So with that, I'll go ahead and get started with the actual presentation. And there we go. Okay, just a little bit of background as to the program itself. We are now starting the fourth cycle of our preservation grants program, and it's something that our board of directors has been wanting to do for a while, because it is part of our basic mission, is to assist organizations and preservation groups around the country with their activities. And so along those lines, back in 2014, we decided to establish a program for that purpose. And it was started with a bequeathment of a particular donor. And we have since then continued to obtain significant sized donations from other estates, bequeathments, and so forth. And our approach is to invest that all into a separate fund, separate from our operating funds and so forth. And that preservation fund is used exclusively for the purposes of this program. And we use the annual gains from the fund. That is what we use to actually make the awards every year. And so we're not dipping into the capital. The more the capital grows, the more we have available to award grants. It is open and competitive, as you know, and we are limiting it at this point to nonprofit organizations exclusively. Okay. Next slide here. So I mentioned we're starting our fourth annual cycle now. We've awarded 10 grants to date for a total of $65,000, and they're spread mostly in the Northeast and in the Great Lakes area. We also had one of our first awards out for Sentinel Island in Alaska, and down on the Gulf Coast you see Pensacola, Florida there. Here's the listing of the actual awards done to date. Although the program was established in 2014, our first cycle was in the beginning of 2015, and you see each one of the lighthouses listed there and the amount awarded. The maximum amount is $10,000. We have awarded some close to that maximum on the order of $9,000. And we have awarded some on the low end of that spectrum in the amounts of $1,000, $2,000, as you see, and also $3,500. So it all depends on how much is being asked, how much we have in any particular year, how competitive that year was. That leads to our decision as to how much gets awarded for each grant application that we select as a finalist. Okay, some guidelines. And again, all of this is in the website. Who is eligible? As I mentioned, right now, only IRS approved 501c3. If you do not have your 501c3 approved by the IRS at this point, then we will not deem you eligible. It's not that we don't want or welcome new organizations. We do. In fact, last year we awarded a grant to a brand new organization, but we do want to make sure that you have been legally established already as a 501c3. That 501c3 does not have to be the owner. In fact, it's rarely the case where it is the owner. But the applying 501c3 does have to have approval from the owner to perform the activities that they are applying for. And what can the grant be used for? Well, first of all, preservation planning. This is called the U.S. Lighthouse Society Preservation Grants Program. And so we allow both preservation planning, otherwise known as non-capital projects in many circles. That includes things like site surveys, condition assessments, professional designs. In other words, all of the preparatory type work that then leads to preservation execution, otherwise known as capital or bricks and mortar type projects. I'm going to go into a little more detail on that in another slide, which again, this is all information that is on our website. So what type of work is not covered by the Preservation Grants Program? Well, routine maintenance, we do not cover. The planning or execution of any lighthouse interpretation projects, and again, I'll show more detail on that. Once again, to emphasize, this is a preservation, not interpretation program. Not that we have anything against interpretation, but our focus right now is on preservation. And we also do not fund any work that is either already underway or completed. We've received a couple of letters of interest in the past where the work was already underway or in one case completed. We do not cover those kind of activities. And again, the maximum that can be requested is $10,000, but as you saw earlier, to this point, we have not yet awarded the maximum amount to any applicant. Many applicants request that maximum amount, but again, based on the amount of funding we have in any given year, we adjust things so that we can award the maximum, provide the maximum amount of help to those most deemed meritorious of our support. Matching funds are not required, but if you do have a match of some type or you have applied for a match, that certainly improves your likelihood of selection. We had one case last year, in fact, of a brand new organization, a new 501c3, who was a new owner of a lighthouse through the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act, and they were applying for a grant from us, and they were also applying for a matching grant from a state organization that would match any other grants in a ratio of 2 to 1. So we provided them amount X, and they applied to get a grant of 2X from another state organization, and I'm glad to report that they received both a grant from us and that double match from the state. And the fact that they had applied to our grant was very attractive to that state fund, and likewise for us, the fact that they were applying to the state fund made it attractive to us. Okay, this is the additional details I mentioned on what we mean by preservation planning. And here's some more examples. As I said, conducting site surveys, developing any type of design work of the preservation work that is going to be performed, and preservation execution, again, any type of implementation on those activities that are listed above that we talked about, and except for anything that has already been done or is underway or completed. I've been using the word lighthouse as a general term. As you might know, our program is also open to light ships, and we have had several letters of interest from lightship applicants over 3 years so far. And what do we not cover? And this perhaps is more important. And you perhaps have noticed, if you have been following our program from the first year, that at the end of each year, before the next cycle, we add some more information to our website because we continue to learn. And so these are lessons learned of primarily some of the letters of interest that we have received. So again, interpretation activities we do not cover. We've received letters of interest, for example, of organizations that wanted to develop displays of Fresnel lenses, oil lamps, and so forth. We also don't cover the research associated with lighthouse keepers. Okay, again, it's not that we don't love lighthouse keepers and their research, but our focus is on the structures themselves. So National Archives or other type of research on the structure is eligible, but on things that would be related to the history of the keepers or interpretation is not eligible. Number two, the letter of interest has to be about the lighthouse or lightship structure itself. We've had letters of interest come in for structures that are not directly associated with the operation of the lighthouse or lightship or the aids to navigation. That includes, if you will, walkways that lead to the lighthouse, stairs and steps, bridges that lead to the lighthouse, viewing decks that are for visitors that are adjacent to the lighthouse itself, but are not part of the lighthouse and therefore not part of the historic structure. And number three and number four, I've mentioned already, no need to dwell on those. Routine maintenance or things that are already underway or completed. Okay, let's take a look at the overall process if you're not familiar with it. Over at step 0, we announce the new grant cycle and the due date for the letter of interest, and we'll show you those dates in just a second. And that's where we are right now. We are in between step 0 and step 1 for the 2018 cycle. In step 1, the prospective applicants, you take a look at the guidelines and you submit a letter of intent by our due date. In step 2 then, the grants committee, which consists of Mike Vogel, Ralph Eshelman, and myself, we look at those letters of intent and we select what we consider the best applicants to proceed with the full application. And what we mean by best is also spelled out in more detail on the website. We have very defined criteria that we use to evaluate each letter of intent. And we independently look at them and then we compare our independent results, we discuss them, and then we agree on, typically it's been about a handful, 5, 6, 7 um, lighthouse lighthouses and organizations that we select to proceed into our next phase, which is a full application. So we have received anywhere from, I believe, the first year we had 28 LOIs, and the largest amount we've received, I think, was 40. So from those, let's call them 30 to 40 LOIs that we receive in phase one, we end up selecting, let's say, a half dozen on a regular basis so far to proceed into phase two. So as you can see, it is quite competitive which ones get to move forward to phase two, which then leads me to stress the point that it is quite important to do a good job in phase one with your LOI. You don't want to assume that just because I submit an LOI, it doesn't have to be that good, because the real meat, my best work, will be submitted in phase two, which is the full 5-page application. You're not going to make it to the second stage if your LOI is not strong and doesn't meet the kind of criteria that we're talking about here. And so if you are one of those lucky roughly half dozen, and we don't have any magic formula, it's just a judgment call on how many we select to move forward into step three. But if you are one of those, then you submit the quote unquote full application, the actual application, by the due date. And we usually give you something on the order of about 6 weeks to submit the full page application, the full 5-page application, after we notify you. Then in step 4, our grants committee once again reviews and evaluates these, and we then make a recommendation based on the money that we have for that year, which is we are notified of that amount by our treasurer and investment committee, how much we have for new awards in any given year. And after we get board approval at the end of step 4, then in step 5, we notify all roughly, let's say 6 for talking purposes, applicants of the final decisions. And then we have a short, it's about a 3-page grant agreement that we send to each of the awardees that they sign and return. And then at that point, we are able to disperse 50% of the grant upfront, and they can then start work on the grant. And then once we're into execution in step 7, the awardee submits a midterm report, and that the timing of that midterm report is spelled out in the grant agreement. You will then get an additional 40%. And then once the work is completed, you submit the final report, and we'll give you the last 10%. Those percentages are new for this year. Up till now, what we've had is 50% upfront, and then you get the other 50% at your midterm. And what we've been finding is that some of the reports were taking longer, a few months longer than had been agreed to. And so for that reason, we withhold a small amount to serve as motivation to get that final report into us. Okay, so move on to the next slide. Here we are at step 0, our preparation for the LOI submittal. We announced the grant cycle as we just recently did. You got notification that we were starting the process. You look at the guidelines, and starting this year, as you know, this is our first time, we are hosting a webinar, and that's why you're here, to review the guidelines and to address your questions and answers. One of the primary reasons we're doing this is, again, we continue to learn every year, And last year we had a couple of organizations either before they submitted their LOI or in a couple of cases after they were approved to move on to the second phase, but before they submitted their application, they contacted the committee with several very good questions. And we were able to address those and without giving any competitive advantage to any particular organization. And as a result of those conversations, they were able to put together a stronger application, or in a couple of cases, a stronger LOI. And so we wanted to make sure that everybody had that same opportunity. Others could have called in and asked some of these questions last year or in previous years, but they didn't. And so this year we decided let's be a little more proactive and actually have a webinar, a Q&A session, and hopefully people will not be bashful here in a little while when I complete these slides. And we can address your questions today, or you can continue to contact us by email or phone calls with any issues you'd like to discuss. Our goal is to enable each lighthouse, each organization to put together a stronger application to more succinctly and strongly state your case to us, which actually makes our job of reviewing them and evaluating them better, easier for us. Okay. And so here's the key dates, which are on the website. Here we are today, March 23rd. We are recording this, and it should be available by next Wednesday or so. The letters of intent will be due to us on May 6th. And it goes without saying, I think you all know this, but all of this is done online. The application is available there. The LOI is available there. You submit it by email, and then you send it to us by May 6th, and we will get back to you by June 4th to notify you whether you have been approved to proceed to the second phase. Or if not. And in most cases, in many cases, in some years, in all cases, when we notify you that you did not make it, we try to give you some feedback as to why your LOI may not have been strong enough to proceed forward. Because again, our desire is that you come back next year with a stronger LOI and make it into the next phase. So we will receive your full applications. Excuse me. We notify you on June 4th, and then your full applications will be due to us by July 9th. So about 5 weeks there. And then our intent is to make the selections and announce the awards on August 7th. Hopefully you all know that it's a special day for the Lighthouse community, the anniversary of the establishment of the U.S. Lighthouse service. Okay. And on our next slide, a little more, lessons learned, tips on what kind of projects stand a better chance in this competitive process. First of all, if you're on the National Register, and especially if you happen to be one of the 12 lighthouses that is a National Historic Landmark. We have received applications from National Historic Landmarks. We received one last year, which in fact was awarded. It's not required that you be on the National Register, but we certainly have a preference for that. Those projects that are really critical, they are really necessary. Some historic element of your lighthouse is in bad shape, and you need to stop, prevent, or repair deterioration to that vital element of your historic lighthouse. Or if there's something that very adversely affects safety or health of the light station, Last year, we made an award along those lines of something that was both. It was rapidly deteriorating and it was adversely affecting safety of visitors. So that was an LOI that was very well received. Perhaps the overall structure is not as historic as some specific elements or features might be. And so you might be focusing your work on that more historic and more significant specific element or feature. That would be well received. If you have already discussed your project with your State Historic Preservation Office, all the better. If you've not only discussed it, and if some kind of approval was necessary and you already obtained it, all the better. Okay, or if you're anticipating it in the near term. If you contact us and you submit your LOI, and we see that it sounds like a very good project, but there is no mention whatsoever about your SHPO in there, and we may contact you and ask you the question. And I'll give you a hint. If your answer is, gee, what's a SHPO? You may not stand a good a chance as others in moving ahead. Okay. And if you already have selected potential contractors, if you've used bids, you have valid quotes, you're ready to execute essentially, all the better. Again, we look at this as a maximum of $10,000 is a usable amount, and it's going to help with smaller projects. And if you have matches from others, it's going to help with a somewhat larger project. So we're looking primarily for those projects where you've already done a lot of your homework, and up to $10,000 grant like this could be very useful in completing your work. At the same time, if you're just getting started, we also encourage you to apply. We awarded a grant last year for an organization, as I mentioned, brand new organization. They had just gotten a lighthouse through the NHLPA, but they recognized that where they needed to start was at the beginning. And so they wanted to do a site survey, a conditions assessment, and they demonstrated that even though they were new, they knew what they were talking about. They had already been talking to the SHPO, and so they did not have anybody in mind. They said they were going to compete to select an organization to do their conditions assessment, and that was fine with us. Okay. And if the total budget required for the overall project is greater than what you're requesting in the grant, which is usually the case, if you show us that you already have the funds in hand or you're going to have them in the near term, all the better. And again, as I was mentioning, where the grant amount that you requested can make a significant impact. And it's the project that you're proposing is neither too small. So for example, you have a $1 million project that you're working on. Well, $10,000 max impact on a $1 million project is not going to have a significant impact. On the other hand, $10,000 maximum on a project of $30, $40, $50, $80, $100,000 could have a significant impact. And of course, up to $10,000 out of a $12,000 project is going to make a significant impact. And the amount requested, again, depends on the project. $3,500 that we awarded last year for a conditions assessment was just right for what that organization needed. to then be matched by the state and be able to move forward with that. Okay, let's show you some examples of what's been done complete. This is Sentinel Island in Alaska. This was a 2015 award, and they had a project to replace and install the vent ball, and also to do some repair work, restoration work on the lantern room door, including some of the glass there. Pensacola was in 2016, our second year. This was actually our first grant that was completed and closed out, and that was because they had all of their ducks in a row again and ready to do quickly, and also, frankly, because the winters are less severe in Pensacola than they are up in Sentinel Island. And in this case, what they did was they found the historic pedestal that supports the Fresnel lens up in the lantern room and restored it and installed it using funds from this grant. And a few of us just coincidentally, when we were in New Orleans about a month ago, we drove by there, got a great visit with the executive director and his staff there, and saw the end result ourselves. Muskegon South Pier headlight, this was the safety kind of issue. This was railings that had deteriorated down at the bottom, as well as adding additional handrails and so forth for safety reasons. That was a 2017 award. And that's basically it. As I mentioned earlier, the Preservation Fund, we make our awards based on the capital gains that we have out of the fund. And I know all of you are interested in applying for grants, but we certainly appreciate getting the word out to the community of potential applicants like yourselves, but also you can help us help yourself by getting the word out to potential donors that might be interested in contributing to the overall preservation fund and therefore be able to help more lighthouses in the future. Okay, and that concludes the actual presentation. And what I'd like to do now with the technology is basically open it up to questions. And so Rich, so what I'd like you all to do, Rich, you tell me if I'm giving the correct instructions here. If you do have a question, please raise your hand. You should have a little icon that allows you to raise your hand, and Rich will see those, and he will then unmute one person at a time and ask that person to identify themselves. You'll be able to ask your question, and then Rich, if you could also unmute Mike Vogel and Ralph Eshelman, if Ralph has signed on. And so between the three of us, hopefully we'll be able to answer your question. And so Rich, did I get those instructions correct?
Yep, sounds good. I've unmuted Mike and Ralph, and Mike actually raised his hand. Do you have a question, Mike?
No, I just wanted to add a comment or two to Henry's excellent presentation on that, just to fill out some awareness on this grants program. I just want everybody to know we are painfully aware that the amounts that we're giving out in grants are nowhere near the need that's out there in the Lighthouse community, and that was a rather extended topic of discussion on the Lighthouse Society board. The question was, do we wait to build this fund to where we want it to be so that we can give out significant and sizable grant amounts, or do we jump in and try to extend a helping hand with what we have while we can? And that's the way we decided to go. So even though the fund is not near what the goal for that fund is, and that's an untouchable goal by the Society for anything but lighthouse preservation, that fund is separate, and we work off the interest that's generated by it. So the decision was, do we plow the interest back into the fund until it gets to be the size that it needs to be, or do we try to help now? And we decided to try to help now because there is a lot of need out there, and the applications that have come back have shown in some cases there's some critically time-sensitive needs to be met that can be met with relatively modest grants. And our basis for all of these decisions is not an allegiance to a group or an individual or anything else. It's always to the lighthouses themselves, and our decisions are made on the basis of what we see as the need for lighthouses, and we evaluate it that way. To that end, I would say that the committee that the board established of Henry and Ralph and myself is basically the most experienced people on the board with actually doing lighthouse restorations. All three of us have done multiple lighthouses now, and so we feel your pain. We know the problems. We're not expert engineers ourselves, but we've managed these projects and are managing projects, which of course are not eligible for this grants program. But we know the problems you face. We faced them ourselves, so we can be talked to and we can speak the same language. Another point that I would like to make is that one of the reasons we jumped into this as early as we could, is that we think there is some value to the U.S. Lighthouse Society recognition of the value of your project. So if you get a grant from us, it means it has survived an expert review, and it has been deemed worthy of support, which I wish we had more to give, but we have what we have, and that it's sort of an imprimatur for your project. And we would hope that you would leverage that in seeking other grants down the line from other individuals and agencies. Henry mentioned one that was well regarded by a state. That's the kind of thing we're looking for. If we can make an impact, not only with the money, but with our name, we would love to do that. And the final thing I would add, and it's just a technical piece in the applications, as you know, these are online applications, and there is a response box that we ask you to fill out with information about your lighthouse. Please, and your project basically, please stay within the lines. That's not an expandable box. And we really don't need to know the history of your lighthouse. We've had applications where people will start out by telling us the details of how their lighthouse came to be and all that. And by the time they get around to actually starting to describe their project, we've run out of space. We don't see the rest of it. If it's not in that box, we're not going to see it at all. We can't retrieve it. So we on occasion do go back and ask for information, but I would really like to think that you guys might stay within the lines and give us a complete and succinct summary of your project so that we can better evaluate. That stage 1 LOI is a highly structured evaluation with weighted scoring and discussion. And then there's a lot of collegial back and forth on the final stage applications, because we do know the problems and we do know, the relative risks and that sort of thing. And then we recommend to the board of directors, and they usually follow. I don't think they've ever not followed our recommendations. But the awards are actually made by the society as a whole through its board of directors. And that's basically what I'd like to add to that. We're in this for service to the Lighthouse community. We are a national organization that was very strongly focused on lighthouse heritage and history, but there's a lot of us who are preservationists on this, and we recognize the need to preserve the structures. So we're trying to expand in a way that's not like the gods from Olympus coming down and dictating what the lighthouse community should do, but to be there as a friend and to work with you and offer help. And we love to hear suggestions and advice from you guys too. And Henry, that's about all I wanted to add to that. It's probably too much, but back to you.
Well, thanks, Mike. No, not at all. I appreciate the excellent remarks, insights, and additions there. And so let me take this opportunity to also turn to Ralph Eshelman and ask if he has any remarks he'd like to add as well.
Well, welcome everybody. And Henry, I thought you did a great job Mike, wonderful explanation about some of the issues that we have. The only thing I'd like to add is that it really is heart-wrenching many times for us to decide who's going to finally get some of these much-needed grants. And I thought that many of you might be interested to know that even though we have a limit as to the amount of money that we can actually award, it's not infrequent that we go back to our board and ask them to add additional money out of our operating funds so that we can give maybe another grant that we couldn't give outright from the preservation fund. So even though we're trying to build that preservation fund up, we're also using oftentimes extra funds that are coming out of our operations just to try to make it helpful to the Lighthouse community.
Great. Thanks for that as well, Ralph. Good insights. And with that, let me turn it over to Rich. And let me ask also Mike and Ralph, if you have an easy way to mute your mic and then unmute when you have something you want to add, if you could do that, and I'll do the same thing. And so, Rich, if you want to go ahead with the first question.
Sure. The first question is from Chad up at New Dungeness Lighthouse, and he is asking a text question. August 7th is very near the end of the work season for most of the light stations in the northern part of the U.S. Would it be possible in the future to move the process back to have the award date in the spring?
Good question. And we've given that some thought, but based on when we started the cycle, we'd have to do some serious thought to how we would transition this so that the awards are made, at the end of the winter or in the middle of the winter, so you can actually start work in the spring. Some of the grants that we have awarded, I would say most of them are unable to get fully underway, by September, which is usually when we will have the grant agreement signed. But on the other hand, some have been able to do partial work. So, for example, one of the grants we awarded last year to Cape Ann Lighthouse involved the fabrication and installation of some stainless steel bands that will go around the original stone just outside the lantern room that is unfortunately falling off, almost literally. And what they were able to do over the winter is actually to fabricate the bands, finish the design work and fabricate them, and then they'll do the installation in June, I believe. So yes, we recognize that, and that has also caused some extensions to some of the original grants in 2015. And so, Chad, we'll take that under consideration and look to see how much of a difference that could make or could have made on the organizations that have applied in the past, and see if we might be able to switch things around in the future at some point. Okay, thanks.
And another text question from Robert. Do you offer grants to the U.S. Lightship Museums? And also if we could repeat Mike's name and position.
Mike, you want to?
Yeah, this is Mike. It's Mike Vogel, V-O-G-E-L. I'm the secretary of the board for the U.S. Lighthouse Society, a member of this committee and a couple of others for that, and co-chair of the American Lighthouse Council with Candy Clifford, which is kind of the political lobbying arm of the lighthouse community. It's not a 501c3. Doesn't need to be because we don't have a budget, but we do work Congress on such things as the ship scrapping program, the mothball fleet proceeds to maritime heritage grants, which is still very much a battle. And I run the Buffalo Lighthouse Association, which has done the 1833 light in Buffalo Harbor, and it's in the process of restoring the 1903 breakwater light station at South Buffalo. And the advisory board of the National Lighthouse Museum. And you don't need to know all that stuff, but That's my resume anyway.
And while you're at it, you want to take a stab at his question about lightship museums?
Oh yeah, and we've had several applications from lightships, and it would depend. I mean, the work would have to be involving the lightship, not the museum and displays and exhibits. But we did have one from a museum that has a lightship, and unfortunately, we couldn't see that our grant on their lightship project it was such an extensive need that we didn't think we were going to have that much of an impact, so it didn't make the cut. But if they have a valid preservation need for a historic structure, and that includes lightships, yeah, definitely they'd be in the running for a grant. If it's something just like, obviously not museum operations and not interpretive displays.
Thanks, Mike. Rich?
Okay, so the next question is audio, and it's from Frederick. Frederick, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Our lighthouse, we're with the Charlotte Genesee Lighthouse Historical Society. I'm the current president. The lighthouse tower itself at this point is separate from the keeper's house. At one time, there was a connection between the two. Would we be eligible to ask for funds for doing things with the house itself? My question is that because we've almost finished doing renovations on the actual tower.
So thanks for your question. And the answer is a tentative yes. And the tentative is just a confirmation here. So the keeper's quarters, the keeper's house is on the light station. It's co-located. It hasn't been physically moved somewhere else.
Right. It was at one point there was a connection between the two, and that was taken down for some reason after it was deactivated.
And the keeper's quarters is part of the organization. You manage it. It's used for what is the structure used for currently?
We have the museum in there right at this point in time, and we're under contract with the County of Monroe, who actually owns it.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. It can be any part of the historic light station, and the keeper's quarters does qualify, would be eligible. At the same time, let me also state that our typical preference is, all things being equal, if there is a tower, a situation in the tower that is in critical need and so forth, then we might give a slight preference to the tower. But yes, you would certainly be eligible for the kinds of activities we mentioned here, those things that stand the best chances of getting awarded for the keeper's quarters as well as for the tower.
Yeah, okay. This is Mike. If I could add just a little bit, because you're in my backyard, Frederick. And I like that lighthouse, and Bill Davis was an amazing guy. But
yes, he was.
I would add that yes, a tentative yes on that too. To bolster your case, I think I would say that if you're doing things in the keeper's quarters or in the house that's attached, if there are historic elements that you're restoring, that would certainly stand a better chance than a change you're making to improve the museum storytelling. The historic elements would be there. And if you're going to consider replicating or restoring a connection between the tower and the house, which I can certainly understand in the northern climates, the safety aspect would be something you might want to mention too. If you're trying to move visitors between the house and the tower in winter weather, that safety element probably might be something you want to mention as well.
Okay, sounds good. Mm-hmm. We've done a lot of renovation on the tower already. We actually, if you were aware of it, we actually removed the top of it, the lantern room, a few years back, and had to repair all around the actual top of the structure, the stone structure, and we did work on the top of it, and it's in pretty good shape right now.
That's great. And that was the top that was fabricated by the high school students way back when?
Actually, yes, you're right. And there's still some of that wood that's still on there is from them.
That's a historic
You
piece
know,
of that structure. That was a historic moment in lighthouse preservation. So don't lose that. Make sure you
right.
interpret that.
Yep, we do.
Okay, are we good, Frank? Are we good, Frederick?
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't want to take all your time. I could probably go on for hours, but we appreciate you doing this webinar, and it's been very helpful to us.
Good. Thanks, Frederick.
Okay, the next question is from Susan. Susan, can you hear us? Susan, are you there? Is Susan Skype? No? Okay, we can come back to her. The next one is from Cornelia. Can you hear me, Cornelia? Nope. All right. How about Edward Miller?
Right, I can hear you.
All right, go ahead, Edward.
Great. Ed Miller, Bailey's Harbor, Wisconsin, talking about the Bailey's Harbor range lights. About 2 years ago, we completed a historic structures report for our lighthouses. We worked with the preservation architect, Laura Davis, and a lot of volunteers helped with this. So we've got things outlined in stages. We've also talked with our state preservation office on this stuff, gotten approvals. So the first stage, we completed the roof outside on the rear range light, the privy, and a small barn. But we've got a lot of interior needs and exterior needs to finish. The plaster is crumbling on some of the walls, pulling away from the lath because the building has settled in some places. So the plan is we'll slowly raise it back up to level on the inside. It's not a safety issue, but the plaster is actually kind of ready to fall off the wall along the stairway. We are actually open for, we show the lighthouse with tours at the Ridges Sanctuary. How likely is a plaster project to be approved?
I'll take a stab at that and then see if perhaps Ralph might want to add something as well. So if I hear you correctly, this is not maintenance. This is you're addressing these issues for the first time, and part of the plaster issue is driven by the fact of settlement. So it's kind of related to structural issues. So on the surface, I would say certainly eligible. How likely, it all depends on the competition. So that one would be tougher to answer. But certainly, the more you can tie it to a structural issue, the better chance you will have. And
okay,
with that,
it is the result pretty much probably of a structural issue.
Mm-hmm.
What about privies and oil houses? How do they fit into this?
They are likewise eligible, and but again, our preference, our priority would be damage to, I would say, a tower would be the first priority. Keeper's quarters would be a second priority, and then it goes down from there. And so again, it depends on what type of competition we have, and but an oil house can be quite important, and certainly eligible to apply. Let me see if Ralph, if you'd like to add any thoughts on that.
Yeah, interesting situation you have there. I suspect that we would be reluctant to want to repair the plaster until you did some type of a study to determine what was causing the settling. So it may mean that you would have to go out and get an engineer to come in and determine what that is. And if you came to us with a project that would help to stabilize that so that we knew it wasn't going to be settling anymore, that would be the ideal approach. But just to go ahead and repair the plaster, if it's a settling issue, you're going to have to continue to repair that plaster as it continues to settle. So I would look at it from a different perspective. I wouldn't go in saying you need to repair the plaster. I would go in and say, what do we have to do to determine what the settling issue is and how do we solve that?
actually understand that because our contractor has a plan for taking care of that. I mean, that's in the works, so that will be coming along. That would be taken care of before anything is done.
Once you know that, then you can put that in your application, and then we would feel better knowing that if we have to repair plaster, it's not going to be a reoccurring issue. But do keep in mind, and Henry's already said this, that repairing plaster is probably going to be a lower priority depending on what the other applications are that we get that year.
Okay, understand. We are excited about our lighthouse because they were just, the Coast Guard decommissioned them in 1969, and we worked with Doug Sharp in 2015. We actually got them relit as private aids to navigation.
Great, congratulations
cool.
on that.
That's cool.
Okay,
I would
webinar.
I would add one little comment to that. Let us know that that's historically correct plaster. And the reason I ask that is that I made a really bad mistake when I was starting the 1833 tower restoration here in Buffalo 33 years ago. And I had the plasterers union offer to plaster the inside of the tower, and I took them up on it, and came to realize over time that wall was never plastered originally. It's so I'm letting it fall off now, which it does in the freeze-thaw cycles of the northern winters. But it was a mistake I made as a preservationist to actually plaster something that had been a rubble stone wall, and we're going back to that slowly. So, make sure you got an original there, and
Well, yeah, I understand that actually because somebody had suggested that we just take the plaster off the lath and put up sheetrock, and our preservation architect with the conference could almost see the flames coming through the phone.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well,
thank you.
Thank you. Rich?
Great. Okay, so I got a couple more text questions here. One's from Joe O'Toole at the Sodus Bay Lighthouse. He thanks everyone for doing this and offering the grants. We are doing a building rehab project that is divided into 3 very distinct phases. We have finished phases 1 and 2 in 2015 and 16, but are raising funds before beginning phase 3, tower and masonry work. Would our distinct phase 3 project qualify for this? Considered a project in progress? Thanks.
Thanks for your question. And as long as you actually haven't started the phase 3 work that you're applying for, then it's perfectly eligible. In other words, you have a large project, 3 phases. I'm going to pull a number out of the air and say, $300,000 was the estimate a few years ago for the 3 phases. You've completed the first 2 phases, each cost $100,000, and you are now raising funds and applying for grants for the 3rd phase, which is going to cost $100,000. And you want to apply for a specific element of phase 3 to restore the masonry on the west end of the tower, and the $10,000 grant would go towards that. The answer is yes, absolutely.
Okay, and then I got a text from Cornelia saying she may be able to ask her question now. Cornelia, can you hear us now? Oh, okay. Moving on. Edward Miller has phoned in. Can you hear us, Edward?
We just talked to Ed, I think.
Oh, we did.
You did, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Susan is still there. Susan, are you with us now? No. Okay. A text question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to suggest that with the technology issues for Cornelia and Susan, perhaps they could just text in the question as some others are doing so we don't lose them. Okay,
right.
Next one.
Sounds good. Jim Harnish asks, you said the priority would be given to repair, restore historic features. Would this include replication of a missing historic feature? We have a 1933 Art Deco style lighthouse, but the lantern room is missing. Would replication of this historic feature qualify under your grant criteria?
Good question. I'm thinking out loud here, and so I'll also ask Mike and Ralph if they can come up with a answer more quickly than I can. Please jump in.
Well, I think, this is Mike. It depends a lot on the specific project. If you
Yep.
have a headless lighthouse, and the lack of the lantern is causing water intrusion that's damaging the tower itself, then I think that's a stronger application than if you're just doing a cosmetic fix on the lighthouse. But again, this is a competition, and this is your chance to propose a project. I, for one, would be favorably inclined to look at a project like that, depending on what the rest of the needs are in the competition, and restoring that key of a missing piece on a lighthouse is something that I would feel really good about trying to do. So keep that in mind. It's not a committee decision that I'm speaking here. This is a gut feeling on my part, but it's certainly something we would look at.
Thanks, Mike. And yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with if it's purely cosmetic, then it would probably have, it would be eligible, but would probably not be very competitive. But if you can demonstrate how the lack of the lantern is affecting the structural integrity, the safety, et cetera, critically of the rest of the tower, then that would be definitely well received.
If I could just throw one more thing in here that's not specific to this question, but might form some thinking out there on the thing. If you look at the numbers that we're dealing with here, and realize here that when we go into a grant year, we have a specific number that we're looking at, and occasionally the board will let us go beyond that, but that comes out of operating funds. But that specific number is generally set by the board early in the year, as it was this February in our annual meeting, and at that point we don't know what the interest is going to be on the preservation fund. We're taking our best guess at that. So if we don't have that interest in the end of the year, the society will have to make that up out of operating funds. If we have a little more, we have a little more leeway. And if say we go into a year with the idea that we're going to give out $30,000 in grants and that there's a max of $10,000 per grant, that doesn't mean we're going to give three $10,000 grants. It means that we're going to have that pot of money to work with. And often what happens in practical terms is if you look at the numbers of the grants we've awarded, we'll have 9 and 7 and 6. And at the end of the day, there may be a $2,000 or $3,000 gap between what we've given out and what we can give out. So if you have a small historic elements project like plastering, if it's needed in a historic thing, it may have actually a little bit of a leg up on the bigger projects because we'll be looking for some way to add an additional grant into our awards for a relatively small amount just to fill out that gap. So don't think in terms always of, they're offering a max of $10,000. I'm applying for $10,000. Doesn't always work that way, and you might actually have a better chance if you give us a realistic estimate on, and not what you can spend, but what you think you're going to have to spend on a project, and the smaller ones might fall into a little group of smaller ones that get some serious consideration at the end of the day after the major projects have been vetted. And I just pass that along as sort of an insider tip, but run with it if you will.
Thanks for that, Mike, and again, excellent, insight from real facts. If you guys go back and look at the amounts we've awarded, you'll notice that last year we had a grant for $1,000, one for $3,500. The year before we had a small one as well, and so absolutely, some of those smaller grants, if you demonstrate, a lot of the key things we're looking for, stand a good chance of getting some level of award. So thanks. Back to you, Rich.
Okay, Martha at the Battery Point Lighthouse in Crescent City asks, she had asked the first question about her boathouse on the island, which was already answered earlier, but then continued, we are also running out of lights that are no longer made and need to switch to LED lights. Could this grant apply?
I was pressing the wrong button here. So the answer, I think, is no, because that's basically a maintenance issue, non-historic. So I'll just leave that open to see if Mike or Ralph want to add anything, but I believe that would not be eligible, is replacement of the actual light emitter with LED lights.
Yeah, this is Ralph. I would agree with you, Henry. But of course, it always depends on what applications you get that year. So my guess is that it would be a very, very low priority.
Okay. The next one is from Pat. Pat, can you hear me?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
I am with the Round Island Lighthouse in northern Michigan. And the Preservation Society is a 501c3. However, the lighthouse is owned by USDA Forest Service. So my question has more to do with eligibility. In the information on your website, you indicate that we need to show legal responsibility for the preservation of the lighthouse. My question is, what sorts of documents are considered acceptable? A memorandum of understanding or some kind of correspondence from the USDA?
Okay, thanks for your question, Pat. Basically, anything that demonstrates that you have the authority to do this currently from the owner. So, for example, if you have an existing MOA, if you have an existing license or lease, that's fine. If you don't have any of those or have one in the works, it could be as simple as a current letter from the owner, from USDA, saying that you have discussed this project and with them, and that they, as the owner of the lighthouse, certainly approve of this project. But again, if you have a more overarching standing agreement, that would be sufficient. And you don't need to send it to us as with the LOI. You would just need to tell us that it exists, and this is how you're going to demonstrate that you have the authority to do that. And then we may follow up and contact you if it looks like you're going to be in good standing for the next phase, and then we might ask for a copy of it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is Mike again. It's just a checkbox on the LOI form, and the reason for that is not that we want to, we don't want to actually have the document in hand to do that. What we're trying to avoid is a case where we award a grant, and then the group that gets the grant comes back to us a year later and says, great, but the town wouldn't let us do it, or the government wouldn't let us do it. And the reason we don't want that to happen is it's not fair to the other applicants, because there's only so much in the pot any given year to give out. So it's basically a fairness issue.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pat. Rich?
Yep. Okay. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So Cornelia texted me her question. Preservation work, which is already underway or completed, ultimately we are looking at $1 million preservation. How does my grant application this year affect future chances? Is preservation work defined in specific pieces?
So I'll take a stab at my understanding of that question. So you've got a I kind of addressed this a little bit earlier with a different question. You've got $1 million program to do the entire light station, let's say, and perhaps you've got part of that already underway and part of that already completed. Let's say that you have raised $300,000 so far, and that you have actually implemented 200,000 of that 300,000. And but for 2018, you have some goals, some plans that are in mature condition, that you want to do a specific preservation project on your lighthouse, and it's going to cost $50,000 for that particular project, and you're applying for $10,000 from us. That's how that would fit in. We would look at that as very favorably and say, okay, yep, this is a $10,000 part of a $50,000 project, and that $50,000 project is part of a larger $1 million program over many years. And oh, by the way, this organization has demonstrated over the last few years that they can raise funds. So we are confident that they can raise the balance of the $50,000 project with our $10,000 grant. And with the execution of past phases, they can demonstrate that they've done a good job of implementing the money that they have raised and know what they're doing, have a good relationship with the SHPO, etc. So that's my answer to my understanding of the question. And Cornelia, if I didn't get the question exactly correct, please chat back with Rich and let us know if we answered the right question, and if you have anything else on that.
Cornelia, this is Mike.
This is
Ralph. You want to go ahead?
Okay, I'll go first. Just as a suggestion that if you have $1 million project, obviously there's a lot of different issues that you must have. And so, for example, let's say that one of them might be water penetration coming through a door or a window or whatever. And if you picked a project like that, that would probably have a higher priority than just an overall, we need $10,000 for our $1 million grant program.
Right. I think Ralph is right that it can't be just, fund 1% of the lighthouse restoration. It has to be for a specific. So you're doing $1 million project, but next year you want to pull the window frames and have them refurbished and put back in to avoid water penetration or whatever. That would be good. But I think in the text question, there was a second one embedded in there, and that was, how would getting the grant this year affect my future year grant chances? And the answer to that is it depends on the year. It would, if you say, help me fix my windows this year, and we agree, doesn't mean we're not going to be able to help you do the doors in a future project, or replace the lantern room glass, whatever. That second project would be simply measured against the other projects that are submitted in that grant cycle year. So, there wouldn't be any carryover impact of a negative impact. There might be a little bit of a positive impact if you've demonstrated the ability to adequately perform the grant application guidelines and meet the criteria and do the reporting. That would give you a leg up a little bit. So that'd be a little bit of a positive impact, but I don't see a negative one there.
Mike, thanks for that addition. I kind of missed that reading that part of the question. The only requirement that we do have currently, I believe it's in our criteria, is that you cannot apply for a new grant until you have completed any previous grants that you may have been awarded. And by completed, I mean you've submitted a final report and you've heard back from us that we've closed it out. In fact, I had a question come in this morning that was emailed to me from a past applicant and awardee. They have 2 lighthouses that their organization manages, and they received one in the past for one, completed that work, and we closed it out. And they asked if they could apply for a grant for the other lighthouse that they own that they want to do some work on this year. And the answer is yes, absolutely. As long as you, in this case, it's a different lighthouse altogether. They are located very near each other, but it is a different lighthouse, and they had already closed the other grant. So yes, and as Mike said, if you already have a track record demonstrating to us your capabilities, then it could actually make it a little bit easier. But it all, again, depends on the criticality of the need of what you're applying for. Okay, over to Rich.
Okay, so the next question is from Terry Lynn McDonald. The Defunct River Lighthouse is not accessible by land, yet has been accessed by vandals. Would a project to install a security camera be eligible for a grant?
Unfortunately not. As much as we'd like to help with something like that, that would not be, historic preservation. And in fact, some of us drove by there not too long ago and wanted to try to get a look at it, but realized that we can only get there by boat. Yeah, unfortunately, that would not be eligible. But once you get to the point of wanting to actually work on the tower, please get back in touch with us.
Okay, and now Brad Coop asks, Wood Island Lighthouse, Bedford, Maine. We have been restoring the lighthouse to 1906 period of significance. Adjacent to the connector between the house and the tower was a separate barn at the time. We want to replicate that barn. The reconstruction standard on the Interior Department Preservation Standards would allow reconstruction of a missing historic structure. Would research of historic plans, etc., and then design and reconstruction of the barn be eligible?
I believe the answer is yes. I'll take a stab and then see if Mike and Ralph can add to it. So this was a historic element. You want to research it, you want to design it, and this is not interpretation. And so, yes, it would be eligible. Now, how competitive it would be, that's a different story, and it all depends on the other applications that we get. But eligibility, yes, it would be eligible.
Yeah, this is Ralph. Brad, I commend you on using the term period of significance. That's really great that you've done that and determined how you want to try to restore that property back to. And also you referred to the Secretary of Interior standards. So those are really great qualifications. I would agree with Henry that yes, I think it qualifies. However, depending upon what the other proposals are going to be that year, it's going to be tough to say whether that would be a medium to a low priority.
Okay, thanks, Ralph.
Okay, this is Rich. Brad actually followed up asking, we also have erosion on the shoreline very close to the tower. Would construction of a stabilizing structure to arrest the erosion be covered?
No, that would not. We have received LOIs like that in the past, and that's why we added in our criteria that things of that nature, even though they are vital in many cases to prevent eventual damage to the Lighthouse Foundation, those are usually much costlier projects. And since it's not direct preservation of the tower or other historic elements, again, we have to prioritize and focus. And so we decided that those kind of projects would not be eligible.
Okay. And then Susan has texted me her question. Thunder Bay Island Light Station has recently completed the HSR. Will the cost eliminates included estimates? Apologize for that. Will the cost estimates included be acceptable for the contractor bid? The ice buildup is too thick for any trips out to the island 14 miles offshore for a site visit.
I think I will interpret the question to mean that you have some work some preservation work that you want to do, and you don't have actual contractor bids at this time. You have the cost estimates from your historic structures report. And by the way, congratulations on having done a historic structures report and prioritizing all of your activities. So yes, if you have at this point in March with the LOI due in early May, you have cost estimates from your HSR for the project that you want to do, and the project itself is eligible. Those would be very acceptable for purposes of the LOI. If you make it through that first phase into the second phase, and you have an opportunity to update cost estimates, we would certainly welcome that. But yes, that would be perfectly fine for the first phase.
Okay, and then Cornelia has switched to a telephone, and we think may be able to ask her a question. Cornelia, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Hooray.
Thank you for your persistence.
Asked a similar question. I also have, we're at Baker Island Lighthouse in Maine, not Massachusetts. And we also have had a complete assessment done, but it was done 10 years ago. So again, those cost estimates, we're a funds organization for the National Park, which owns the lighthouse. So we have some money set aside, so we could update those, and we could also cover some of the changes in those costs. But I basically had a similar question: would I need to update those before submitting my LOI, or could I allow for some overrun?
No, yeah, I think for the first phase, if you have something that is even 10 years old, I would state very clearly it is a 10-year-old estimate for the overall project. And, if you want to try to figure out, some way that you could escalate that even for inflation to today's costs, that would be fine. But, for purposes of the LOI, anything that along those lines would be helpful. We are not trying to, in the first phase, we're not trying to eliminate someone because they don't have current estimates. Whereas in the second phase, the better the cost estimate is, the higher typically the higher your probability of getting a grant could be. But again, it depends on the criticality. We've had some applications, some LOIs where the need was critical, but they may not have had a good cost estimate, and they made it into the application phase. The need was still critical. They were able to obtain a reasonable cost estimate, and they were able to get the award. Okay.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, and thank you for doing this program. Wonderful.
And thank you for your persistence in trying to.
Cornelia, I hope I never owe you money.
She'll track us down. Thanks, bye. Rich?
Okay, and the last question I have is from Frederick. Please clarify the award money. I originally thought it was to help with getting the information we needed to do a project. After listening to today's presentation, I believe that the money is awarded to actually used to do the project. Is this correct?
Yes, and partially yes. So it's preservation planning and preservation execution. So if you have, the name of the game is preservation of a historic lighthouse. And so if you have a project in mind, so for example, there is water penetration somewhere in the historic tower that is leading to structural damage. Let's say that's your project, and you you need to do it, but you haven't done anything about it so far. Then you would be eligible to apply for a grant to figure out what to do about it. So you could hire an historic architect, an engineer, structural engineer, to develop plans, to go investigate it, to go design what they're going to do about it in terms of finding where the water is penetrating, taking care of the damage that was done by the water penetration, and so forth. So that's part A, is the preservation planning. Or you've already done that, and you now need to actually go take care of the water intrusion, stop it from continuing to come in, address the areas that need to be repaired. That would also be eligible to be covered under our grant. Or you could go back to even fundamentals. You have just become the owner of the lighthouse, or you've been the owner for a while, and you believe the lighthouse and its associated structures are in need of preservation, but you don't know exactly what. And so you want to hire a firm to come out and do a conditions assessment and tell you what is the overall condition of the lighthouse, and prioritize the work that needs to be done. So all of those would be the types of activities that would be eligible under this grant program. And let me see if Mike or Ralph would like to add to that.
Yeah, well, I think the key thing there is that the more you do to substantiate. I'm missing the word
Substantiate?
Here. Yeah, substantiate. That's it. I've got a head cold, and it's making me think funny. But anyway, the more you can do to substantiate the problems your lighthouse has and what you need to do, and the more you can do to make sure that when you do things, you're going to be in compliance with all of the regulations and guidelines that you have to be in compliance with, the more comfortable we're going to feel about awarding you a grant. And some of us think very strongly favorably about planning grants to make sure that you're not just haphazardly attacking your lighthouse's problems, but you're actually prioritizing them, understanding them before you start doing things, to make sure that what you actually do is helpful and doesn't exacerbate a situation. So planning grants are a key thing, and we don't rule them out by a long shot. We kind of look very favorably on them.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, Rich, any others?
Got Brad Coop again. In preparation of the LOI, would embedding a historic picture, e.g. our small barn, within the 2 pages be appropriate?
Sure. If there is a specific element that you want to highlight, that would be perfectly fine. And that way we know, if it can help us visualize and understand what you are proposing, it would help. What we don't want is, here's a pretty picture of our lighthouse at sunset. Look how gorgeous it is. Those kind of pictures are not helpful. And especially when we get into the application phase, the second phase, we've had organizations that have sent in, 10 pictures, and 9 of them are, pretty sunsets and sunrises and water shots, and those are the things we don't need. And then the 10th shot was, okay, here's the specific, preservation work that needs to be done, and that's what we're looking for. So if your picture helps convey precisely what you want to do, absolutely.
Yeah, obviously I'm having trouble with words today, so I like looking at pictures. I don't know how, I wouldn't want you to try to embed that in the form itself, but you can certainly attach it to the
Yeah.
email that you're sending it back. Don't try to take up space in the form by doing that. And of course, if the pretty sunset picture does happen to show the light streaming through holes in your tower, it might be applicable.
Back to Rich.
Okay, I don't have any more questions on the board. Nobody's raised their hand, so I think we're good.
We'll give another minute here in case somebody else thinks of one. And if Rich, can you see how many people are still on the webinar at this point?
28.
Okay, so most of the 32, I think it was originally, are still on. To me, that's good news, and that everybody stayed for the Q&A, almost everybody. And it also means that many of these questions that have already been asked by those that did raise their hand and either speak up or send a text in, or persisted, like Cornelia and did both, that the answers to those questions were relevant to your situation and helped you understand more about our program and what could work and what may not work as well as other things.
Another question has arisen.
Okay, good. I'll stop tap dancing then.
Edward, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I'm back again. I'm also involved at another lighthouse in Door County through the Door County Historical Society. We're the caretakers for Eagle Bluff Lighthouse on the Bay. Oh, where'd that come from?
A musical lighthouse, I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyhow, I'm just looking for some thoughts on this. We don't have an historic structures report prepared for that yet. That's on the list of things to do. We're trying to budget for that and get some grants for that. But we've also prepared a detailed project scope of work for some issues with the lighthouse and specifically the tower. The tower does not have the original 3 tower windows. And you mentioned if you have problems with water. We've got water coming in those windows. We have done some research. We know what the historical windows should look like. We are also one of 8 Norman Gothic style lighthouses built like that. So we've got contacted some of the other lighthouses. We know what those windows need to be. What are the thoughts on that? Do we need to try to get the historic structures report first, or proceed with what we know the windows should look like?
So I'll take a stab and then open it up for Ralph and Mike to jump in. So we do not require a historic structures report or even a conditions assessment report. If you have a very specific element like that you have identified, you have done your research, we recognize as practitioners that water intrusion is enemy number one, and so we always have to try to stop water intrusion as quickly as possible, and that includes we don't have time to wait for a thorough HSR or a complete conditions assessment. We need to take care of this now. And it sounds like you have that situation. You've done your research. So I would say take what you've got, put it together, and I think that would be a well-received LOI based on what I've heard you've done so far. Ralph, Mike?
Yeah, I'm good with what you said, Henry. I think that's perfectly right. I didn't hear anything in that description that I thought would be ineligible for grant application.
I'll go a little further on that, because we are a historically restored lighthouse, but it needs a lot of tender, loving attention. The major work was done in 1960. The tower windows do leak. In this lighthouse, we get a lot of visitors, and the tower stairs are the stairs from the first floor to the second floor. So it's an issue when we've got water dripping in the tower and people going upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, water filtration, that needs to be addressed.
Yep.
Okay, appreciate
Definitely.
it. Maybe we'll go along those lines then. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ed.
And I don't want to scare you, but we nearly we had a weird situation in Buffalo a few years ago where we had people. There was a non-historic handrail installed in the 1960s during a Save the Lighthouse movement back then, and we had people getting electrical shocks as they were going up the tower, and we couldn't figure out why, because there was no electricity in any of the lower portions of the tower whatsoever. It turns out that we had had water penetration through the limestone blocks of the tower, and it had contacted some conduit we had buried in the wall for the electrical lines going to the top of the tower, which were not historic either, but needed these days. And that had started a very thin corrosion trail that seeped down the interior wall between the plaster and the stone and contacted the metal stanchions on the handrail. So it takes some time to figure these things out sometimes, but that's why people were getting shocks going up the stairs. And we had to take part of the wall apart, the plastering off the wall to fix that. But these are never easy things, and you will never complete a lighthouse project. You can maybe complete the preservation part of it, but then you're right back into a maintenance cycle to keep those problems from recurring. These things are out there and they're exposed to the elements, and they're meant to take a beating, and that's what they do. And as a lighthouse keeper in this era, your job is just to try to stay on top of the situation and keep the damage to a minimum and save that tower for the next generation of keepers to maintain and pass it along. It's not an easy process. It's a difficult thing. There's a lot of cost involved, and $1 million projects are not uncommon. But take them one step at a time, one project at a time, and you'll get where you need to go. Rich, do we have any more questions, or can I tap dance and keep?
Well, I
Henry,
got one more from Susan. She texted me the question, but it looks like she's online. Let me see. Susan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yay.
Okay, feel free to ask your question directly.
Okay. My question is, our LOI will be for phase 1 stabilization and repairs identified in our HSR, and it is for the lantern room windows, which are broken, and the framework is rusted and all deteriorated and gone. So we have a lot of water penetration, but also, there are 2 of the metal spiral steps that are completely broken out leading up to the lantern room. So my question was, even though it's not the actual lantern room itself, can the steps be included in an LOI since they present a safety issue?
Absolutely, Susan. First of all, thanks for your perseverance in
Sure.
following up. And secondly, yeah, and it's very, I don't know for sure, but, it's very likely that, the reason those steps are, the way they are is from the water penetration
Sure.
leading to corrosion, et cetera. So,
Yeah.
yes, that absolutely.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that appears to be all the questions at this point.
If you want to wait just a minute more, I can tap dance through an infomercial and see if anybody else has a question. Yeah. And the infomercial is just basically two things. One is, if you guys haven't visited the uslhs.org website recently, and by recently I mean the last couple of years, we've put a lot of time and effort into it, and it has succeeded beyond our wildest hopes when we started it. Part of it was hiring Candy Clifford as a historian, but we're, I think, past 43 terabytes of information on that site now, and there's just a ton of stuff on there and databases, and it's reached sort of a tipping point where other lighthouse researchers and groups are pouring their research into our database to try to make it a one-stop shop for historical research, images, whatever. So there's a lot of stuff on there, including things you can do for kids programming at your lighthouse, historical stuff, databases. The Fresnel lens inventory we started years ago is continually updated. Give it a shot, take a visit, look through it if you can. And eventually, in the next couple of months, you'll see an expanded presence on another part of this committee. I mean, you notice at the start, Henry is chairman of the Preservation Grants and Awards Committee. Awards is kind of expanding too. We moved the ALC's Ross Holland Award, which is pretty much the Lifetime Achievement Award, out of the ALC and into the USLHS. It'll be awarded by the USLHS this year for the first time. The ALC did its final award last year. And so that'll continue, but we're adding a couple of new awards, and you should be aware of those because I would encourage you to apply or to nominate. And when that form goes up, there'll be a chance to do that. One is for excellence in preservation. It's named for Colin Chambers, who is a top of the line preservationist with a number of lighthouses to his credit. And that's for an excellent preservation project completed within the last 2-year window. And by completed, again, as we mentioned in this webinar, it doesn't mean you completed the entire lighthouse preservation. It means you did something really good and significant, and it'll be a competitive process. You maybe redid your lantern room, or you refurbished your Fresnel lens, or whatever. We're looking for good projects to honor. We also have a system that's evolving and in process to let us help you honor your key volunteers, your best volunteers. We will ask for nominations for the volunteer services. And we want you guys to do the vetting on that and pick the best people from your organizations so that we can add kind of a layer of national recognition to whatever you're doing to recognize your volunteers. And that'll be on the site. And under consideration is an award for excellence in education and outreach, educational outreach. We haven't named it yet. We haven't really discussed it in detail yet, but that is a likely thing coming down the pike. So, stay on top of that page a little bit. You may have projects or people that you think might be eligible for that award. It's a non-cash award, but it's a nice little honor. And again, we would encourage you to use the U.S. Lighthouse Society grants and logo and name as sort of a stamp of approval on your projects, and use those to leverage additional grants from your local communities or wherever to let the people in your town know that, yes, the National Lighthouse Preservation Movement is aware of our lighthouse and our project, and they think it's really good. So, that might help you, and we would urge you to consider doing that. I'm done tap dancing, so are there any more questions, or are we done?
No more questions have come up.
Well, thanks for
Henry, great job. Great job on doing the webinar. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for your tap dancing there. And in closing, first of all, I want to thank the 27 participants that are still there for being with us today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your questions. From my end, I think we've accomplished our goal. Very happy that we did get the number of questions that we did. One thing I would request is, if you have, this is the first time we've done this. If you have any recommendations to us about how to improve either the technology, the logistics, the mechanics, those kind of issues, please go ahead and send us an email to the grants program email address that's on the website. And because we wanted to, we think this has been productive because you're still there, but we'd like to make this even more efficient and effective for the future. So please send us your thoughts on that. And likewise, we're always looking for recommendations on the grant application and evaluation process itself. So if you have any suggestions, I wouldn't be able to probably incorporate them for 2018, but it's possible that we could. But certainly we would give consideration to your recommendations on the program for 2019, because we continue to update it, improve it every year. And just to echo what both Mike and Ralph have been saying and what we talked about earlier, get the word out to the community about applying for the program. Get the word out to your partners, people that you know that may want to help increase the size of our preservation fund. And that's about it. Let me turn to Ralph to see if he has any closing thoughts and remarks.
One quick comment, and that is that we want to thank all of you guys because individually you're doing a great job in helping to preserve lighthouses. No one organization can do it. It's going to take a collectiveness, and that's what you guys are doing here. We're only trying to help a little bit here and there. So to all of you, a big, big thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ralph. And Rich, thank you for being our technology producer facilitator. Any closing thoughts from you?
I think everything went great, and I'm happy everybody got a lot out of it.
Great. Thanks, Rich. And that's it for me as well. Thank you all very much, and look forward to hearing from you, and look forward to receiving some really outstanding LOIs on May 6th. If you do have any more questions before May 6th, please do not hesitate to send an email to the grants program email address that's on the website, and we usually respond within a couple of days or so. Sometimes we will follow that up with a phone call to talk about details. Our goal with all of this is just to help you strengthen your LOI and help you preserve your lighthouse. So thanks again, and take care. Bye.